Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. One of my favorite people is back on the show, and I've interviewed Rob Mack many times over the years. If you don't know about him, please visit coachrobmack.com and his Instagram, Rob Mack Official. Rob is an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert, celebrity happiness coach, executive coach, and published author. He wrote a book called Happiness from the Inside Out and has a new book out called Love from the Inside Out. He has an incredibly rare master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, and he is one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. He helps individuals and organizations achieve an energizing balance of authentic personal happiness and effortless professional success based on time-tested science and timeless spiritual wisdom. Visit coachrobmack.com to learn more and enjoy the show. Oh, Rob Mack, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I love being here.
Oh, it's so much fun. We've had so many great talks over the years. Everybody, if you're curious about all of the other interviews with Rob I've done over the years on various platforms, just Google Rob Mack and Elle Russ, and I'm sure a few will show up. I already did your intro, and people know about your first book, Happiness from the Inside Out. But now we have love.
Yes. What
brought you to... I mean, it seems a little logical, happiness to love. These are all sort of the same good vibe things, but what prompted you and compelled you to write a book about love?
Oh, it's interesting. 20 years ago when I became like a happiness coach, I just assumed that people would call me or email me or DM me because they wanted to be happy. But I quickly was disabused of that notion because most people who are reaching out to me were reaching out because they were having trouble with relationships. Like either they weren't in one or they were in a very unhappy one. And so while they were unhappy, for the most part, they felt like the reason they were unhappy was because of somebody or something else with whom they did or did not have a relationship with. So it was really that, it's been a sort of work in progress, at least in my mind and my heart, for about 20 years. And I wanted to speak to it directly, but I felt that the happiness from the inside out should come first. That's also where I had the most experience and had almost certainly had the greatest challenges too. But it sort of came out of that experience with clients and clientele. And of course, my own frustrations and failures around love and relationships and dating and all that good stuff.
Give us an example of something you would consider a failure.
Yeah. So to your point, I don't really see any of my experiences in life as failure. Yeah. It's been really just feedback. I do agree that there is no failure. There is only feedback. If you don't win, you only either win or learn. You never lose. So every experience I've had honestly has been informative and educational and enlightening. And more than that, at this point in time, I don't really have an agenda like for people in my life, which I think allows all of my experiences and interactions, relationships to be joyful and harmonious, at least from my perspective, if not from the other person's.
Okay. What's the different in my mind as we're listening and people out there like, okay, so happiness from the inside out, I kind of get that. Find things to be happy, grateful for, generating it from within. Yes. How is that a different intention, or what's the difference with love, and how would we do that? Because see, with happiness, you can kind of go, hey, be appreciative of, the fact that you walk in your home, you have a place that, we can sort of see that. What about love though? That seems so ethereal and elusive for people to kind of, you know what I mean? And I guess there's a difference between love and romantic love, or are you really talking about romantic love in general when you talk about love?
Yeah, great, phenomenal question, really. So I think of love as your happiness shared, right? So it's like outgoing happiness. So when you're happy and you're alone, we just call it happiness. When you're happiness and you share it with others automatically, organically, seamlessly, without expectation of reciprocity, we can call that love. But you're right, from my perspective, happiness and love aren't two different phenomenons. They're two different ways of looking at the same phenomenon. It's the same single energy that's being manifested or expressed or understand from two different perspectives. So ultimately, they're one and the same. Now, the challenge with most of us in the opportunity is that we confound relationships with love. And so we think of love often, first and foremost, as a romantic relationship. And so it's bound up and all of these assumptions and false and flawed premises that we have around what a relationship should be and how other people should treat us and how we should treat other people. And so we, to a large extent, value or prioritize relationships over and above love. And so quickly you get yourself into a relationship and then you figure out or find out or wonder what happened to the love. It was so fresh and sexy and alive when we first got in, and now it's stale. Where it's kind of like going to a room, and the air is fresh there, and you close the windows and you close the doors and you lock the doors because you're trying to keep all this fresh air in. And very quickly, that fresh, sexy, alive air or love becomes stale. And that's part of the challenge with love and relationships, is that instead of sort of getting into, let's say, a quote unquote traditional relationship in order to share the joy and the peace and the love that you found within yourself with the other, we do just the opposite of that. We get into a relationship mostly and largely in order to get love from the other person, to extract it. And if we look at most of our relationships, whether romantic ones or familial ones or platonic ones or professional ones, so much of what passes for true love is what I might call false love or pseudo love. It's really just an attempt or effort to extract something from the other person instead of extending something from who and what you ultimately are. And so from my perspective, in my experience, love isn't just, it's not what you do, and it's not even necessarily what you think. Love is what happens or what you feel and what you essentially are when you don't think, when you're not caught up and lost in all these stories in your head about what the other person should be doing, what the world should be doing, what life should be doing, what politicians should be doing, what your partner should or shouldn't be doing. And instead, it's coming back to that place inside where this infinite, eternal love always exists, and living from that place and space without any expectation of reward or reciprocity, and doing it for joy's sake alone.
I would assume you would agree with the following, that I'm probably speaking from your brain here on, like, hey, if you've really gotten to the point where you're happy on the inside out, you enjoy your own company, you love who you are, you're happy in life, you're in a great position to attract romantic love, because you're not looking for something to fill a hole, something to get. It's more like, let me look for an addition to my already happy life, right? So many people look to love as in like, well, I need this because I'm missing that, or it's filling a void. Or I noticed and I'm sure you've had the same experience too. You can use law of attraction to attract romantic love, but you're going to attract sort of a mirror to the shit you got going on and what you're lacking. And this is right back to what we've talked about before. And, I wrote about the shame in my confidence book about, I attracted like the perfect person and everyone on the list, but we both had the same problem that was the deal breaker, which was the inability to be vulnerable and no emotional intimacy. And guess what? I blamed him for that initially. It was fucking me too. It was me. And my coach was like, oh, that's interesting. That you think the universe played a joke on you here. You're the robot. You're the unemotionally available person. And then I was like, damn it, I've come so far though. I've done all this work. I'm really, and it was like, so you do have to shore up these areas in your life, right? Before you maybe even, because you're going to be bound for more success in attracting the right partner.
You nailed it. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more on all those points. Elle, like, yes, the universe abhors a vacuum, kind of. So when we come from this place of emptiness and this void inside in an attempt to shore it up with things or people outside of us, that never works. And if it does work, it doesn't work for very long, right? It's just sort of band-aiding or putting a band-aid over something that needs surgery, so to speak. The other point you make, which is just so incredible, is that in addition to sort of like needing nothing, attracting everything, right. We can see that play out in relationships, and we have empirical evidence, to support that. So we know happier people are more attractive, literally and figuratively, meaning that happy people are rated as more attractive than their unhappy counterparts, right? So a Duchenne smile, a smile that you cannot fake, makes you instantly more physically attractive. That's that. Secondly, happy people tend to get married earlier, stay married longer, or happen in all the relationships, whether they're married or not. So it's attractive in that way. And then, beyond that, which we talked a little bit about in previous conversations and episodes, but also in my book, Happiness from the Inside Out, happiness leads to successful life outcomes. You make more money, you save more money, you have better health, you experience less job burnout, right? You have kids. If you want to have kids, you have a marriage. If you want to have marriage, generally, for the most part, it's so much easier to attract and or manifest or achieve what you want to if you're coming from a place where you don't, or where you've at least seen into the emptiness and void inside of you. And instead of trying to fill it up with other things and other people from the outside, you sort of go directly to the source for it and take care of it at the very root, right? So all that's true. There's a quote that I love so much that you'll appreciate. It's a D.H. Lawrence quote. And he says something like, those that go searching for love only make manifest their own lovelessness. And the loveless never find love. Only the loving find love, and they never have to seek for it, right? So another word for loving, the loving, are the folks that are happy in their aloneness, because if there's one thing we know about the happiest relationships consist of two or more people who are happy in their aloneness, in their independence in and of itself. And so when you found that happiness within, I'll call it love, in your aloneness, it's so much easier, and I'd almost say automatic, to share the happiness and peace and love that you found in your aloneness with someone else in your togetherness. It just happens so easily and effortlessly and enjoyably. And you don't do it for any other reason except to unburden yourself and relieve yourself of all this peace, love, and happiness that you've sort of been just storing up or drowning in or enjoying all day, every day.
Okay, a couple thoughts came up for me. One is I just flashed to, I have a friend who, you'll walk into their house and they just always have the TV on. Always. It's just a matter of they're not even watching it. It's just on, or the news or whatever. And it's low volume, but it's on. And I remember being like, are you even watching this? Where she's like, oh, I keep it on. I don't know. It's just I'm like, doesn't that bother you? She's like, no, it's company. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, girl, if you're not, you know what I'm saying? That right there it says something to me about the ability, if you can't be in silence with your own thoughts and you need a distraction, or you feel like you need company, then you're that right there. Now I'm saying this about her specifically, but I'm saying that to me would go, ooh, there's a codependent red flag there, that this person is not comfortable alone in their own space. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, yes, Elle. I mean, the litmus test for a happy and or self-loving and or loving person is someone who can be happy and feel love in their aloneness with nothing but their own thoughts to keep them company.
Right.
Period. Right? If you have trouble doing that, understandable, very human of you. It's welcome
but that
back.
Says something of what you need to work on.
Absolutely. And it says something about what and where your joy and your happiness and peace ultimately comes from. If another person truly made us happy, even though intellectually we all understand that nobody else can make me happy. I know it's me, it's going to make me happy, but we don't always live that way, right? We go still out searching for someone to shore up that emptiness or that void inside, or distract us from whatever else is on our minds. But if that actually worked, that same person that made you happy on day one would make you happy on day 3,570. That's just not the case. We just know that's not the case. And we can also see how that plays out with different activities and with money and other things. And so, yes, Elle, it's absolutely true that at the end of the day, if I would, simplify it, say, look, love is happiness, and happiness is presence. Happiness is presence, and so is love.
I also had this thought about, because this has happened, and maybe it even happened with you when you first got on the positivity train. I'm sure you've run into this as well, where let's say you're I'm happy, I feel good, and then you meet someone who may not be at that same demeanor or level yet, and then now we've got a project, don't we? And the happiness projects don't work usually with other people, right? And then you're trying to impart in positivity and lift up, and then you're being a coach, and and so I at one point realized this was happening, and I was like, ooh, pushing positivity is getting a backlash. So that's interesting. People aren't ready for it, as we know, but also looking to find someone who's also already at that stage or similar, right? Versus that, because I think that's a problem, right? We're happy. And then you go, oh, I got you, or come with me. I can help you. No, you can't. You won't.
Oh, I struggle with that one. I really struggled with that one for a long time. Elle, you really called me out on that. I mean, my first couple relationships, boy, I had a savior complex. Yep. I was really struggling on one hand to figure out and find what my purpose in life was and what my professional purpose was. And I didn't make the connection and see the ways in which I was trying to live out this purpose through my relationships, particularly my romantic relationships. And so I loved the project. It's I loved helping someone and I believed that I could just love them enough or coach them in the right direction or find the right book, they'd be okay. And then we'd be okay and we'd all be happy. And they'd see my value too, that I brought something, really valuable to the table. And of course that never works. It's like, first of all, you can't impose your ideas and expectations on somebody else and then expect them to fulfill them and then get mad at them because they didn't fulfill your expectations. It's like, no, first of all, my expectations are my own, yours are yours. Second of all, if I'm getting into a relationship because I ultimately or mostly just want to be a helping professional or a coach or a therapist, maybe I should just become a coach or therapist or helping professional, right? So
maybe I should charge so that when people pay for it, they're actually going to maybe do something.
Exactly. There's a real investment and we're on the same page from the beginning. I couldn't agree with you more there.
That is, so let's talk about romantic love for a second here. It's just wonderful, right? But let me just throw this out. Okay. So we've all been here. I'm sure you have. And I know people listening have, which is, okay, when you have a crush on someone, there's incredible chemistry between two people. Our genes haven't changed in hundreds of thousands of years, right? Okay, so we are literally in a oxytocin, dopamine, testosterone, endorphin fucking crack house. You feel it, your appetite, right? Your sleep's off. You can't stop thinking about the person. I mean, and it's a wonderful, and then thinking about the person gets more dopamine hits, right? So you're just on crack, really. It's just the drugs are different. And this is a little bit of a sketchy time. Our genetics are driving us. Yes. Right in that moment too. And so in those first 3 months, particularly, right, I think that's a little bit of a like, ooh, we've got to temper that with modern life logic, right? This is where we don't see red flags. This is where we think everyone's perfect. This is where we're idealizing people. How do you square that, right? Or what would you suggest to people? Because it's real, man. I mean, I've been there and even very aware of what's happening in my body going, oh my God, I am full on. Primal has taken over and I need to catch myself so that I'm not going down some road of ignoring red. You get what I'm saying?
Totally. I mean, you're right. Love has gotten a bad name, right? And it's unfair to a large extent because we often say, for instance, love is blind. Love isn't blind. Love is clear seeing. Lust is blind. Lust is not clear seeing, right? And so that lust and what we often will just call chemistry can cloud our ability to recognize a relationship, another person, as an opportunity to simply enjoy ourselves and psychologically, emotionally, physically, versus calling it our forever partner or someone who we are meant to live happily ever after with and for, right? And so part of the challenge and opportunity is, on one hand, to practice awareness and to practice when it's easy. We can call it meditation, you can call it prayer, you can call it a lot of things, but it's like returning home within yourself to remind yourself of the infinite, eternal pull of well-being, peace, joy, happiness that I call love, that always exists with and within and as you. It's like returning to that as often as possible, particularly when you're not in the other person's presence, right? That's number one. If you don't do that consistently enough, it's easy to be seduced and led astray and to think that this other person holds the key to my love, my happiness, my excitement, my meaning and purpose in life. Understandable. So
yeah, it becomes an attachment, right? Because literally the hormones are making us want to attach for obvious reasons.
That's right. And to your point, some of it is like based in evolutionary psychology. Some of it's purely, neuroscience and neurology or neuropsychology. And then there's a part of it too, which is like programming and conditioning. We are often attracted to those very people who will make us most miserable because of previous experiences we've had in our lives, right? And so there's a familiarity there, or an attraction there that isn't always healthy, at least with respect to this idea of like a long-lasting, relationship, right? Now, in terms of the soul, your spiritual development, your growth, I mean, it's perfect, so when we as human beings say, oh, this is terrible, on some level, your soul is like, this is great. This is precisely what you need to go beyond this idea that somebody or something else can make you happy or make you feel love all the time. That's your job. That's not even your job. That's who and what you are. So yes, we find ourselves, I think, consistently confused by what we feel or experience in our minds and our bodies and our lives. And that's especially true if and when we don't spend enough time just tapping into, tuning into, and turning on to that infinite source of love and peace and happiness that exists within you at all times. If you can do it when it's easy, then when you get yourself into one of these situations or you find yourself interacting with someone who sort of pushes all your buttons in this really phenomenal way, you can still practice that awareness and practice that presence even when you're with them. So yeah, you can enjoy it all, but you don't get lost in the stories in your head that tell you this infatuation is in fact love, when we know that's not the case. It's not love. It's just infatuation, or it's just addiction, or it's just attachment.
How do you feel about struggle in terms of, but the best relationships I've had have been easy and relaxed?
Yeah.
You know? They really have. And so and you know, our friend Tanya Dyer, she would say struggle is suspicious, right? And so when I notice or sense or see that people have started off and it's like, oh, you know, like too soon there's issues. Now, sometimes maybe you could say, well, that's great. It's getting all over with now and worked out. And can love come from there? I always see it as so suspicious, though, and as a red flag in some way. What are your thoughts about that? Like, you know, because you just mentioned, right? Like sometimes you can get in a relationship with someone you're very attracted and there's lust, but they're pissing you off, right? And again, there's a lot to look at there. We would probably coach this and be like, you need some coaching before you get in a relationship. But do you get where I'm getting at here?
I do. It's such a profound question. You know, adversity, what we might call struggle, serves us in so many ways. You know, straight roads don't make skillful drivers, right? Like calm seas don't make skillful sailors.
Right. Yeah. I don't want the guy that's always had an easy road on the Caribbean or whatever. Yeah.
Totally. Like the clients I probably feel the saddest for, you know, the saddest for are the ones who have lived nothing but charmed lives. It's hard for them to enjoy or appreciate anything, and you wonder if they've even grown, right? So there's that. Now, that being said, I am all for not torturing myself or you or anyone else or any of us torturing ourselves on the way to happiness. Like that is just ridiculous, right? Life is tough enough on its own. So I'll say a couple things. First, by all means, let's not make it harder than it needs to be. There's that. Second, let's also recognize that if we're bumping up against people or even experiences in life that trigger us in some way or make us feel frustrated or anxious or anything less than peaceful and joyful and inspired, that the invitation is not to look at the other person and try to change the other person. So in other words, if you're looking in a mirror and you don't like what you see, you don't try to change the mirror. You look back within yourself and say, okay, there's something within me that feels some kind of resonance with what they're saying or doing, such that it's activating me. If I weren't finding or feeling some resonance there, it'd be like a stranger calling you on the phone and cussing you out and then calling you by the wrong name. You know instantly, oh, this isn't about me at all. You know, I don't need to get upset about this at all. This person's clearly confused. It's okay. But until we come to that place and space where we can find this unconditional peace and love and happiness, even in the face of people who lack peace and love and happiness, who are mean or cruel or unkind or triggering, until we come to that place, there's still work to be done. Now, you don't have to do that work and stay in the relationship. You can do the work and get out of the relationship too. It's just that most of us get out of the relationship and then we assume or think we've solved the problem because we've dropped that dead weight of a person who was causing us so much pain.
We've dropped the igniter of our own crap, but we're not looking at the own crap. Right.
That's right. The dynamite is within us. They just lit the match, but it's going to be lit by somebody or something along the way at some point in time. So that's the real challenge.
There's a struggle in the beginning. You got to look at yourself and go, what's the struggle about? Who does this remind me of? Have I been here before? Is this triggering something? Am I right? Like you have to start to do the investigations there.
That's right. And just notice too, if you have these stories, so especially if there's generalizations in the stories, if you have the stories where it's like all women are X or all men are Y, it's a huge red flag that the problem isn't out there at all. It's within you.
Oh, also, I had that experience, and that story will be confirmed for you over and over again. So my story was because of my father, who had like lost all of our money and kind of became a drunk, and again, like nice guy and whatever, but kind of a loser, not stepping up, and left my mom in that position. I was always like, aha, here you go. See, you marry a guy, you let him pay for everything, and then one day they leave you high in the dust, and now you're screwed and not going to happen to me. I'm going to go out and make my own money. But you know what? I really, years later, had to go back and take a real hard look at that declarative statement I made and cancel it and reword it, because what kept showing up for me was exactly confirmation. Ah, see, told you, can't trust them. They'd be unavailable in some way, whether it was like they lived in another country, or I only saw them, or they didn't want a relationship, or they were a cheater, or they just weren't, whatever it was some level of unavailability, like, again, to continually prove like you, until I had to turn it around. And when I did, oh my God, I started to attract like the opposite of that story.
Yes, Elle. I mean,
it was me. The common denominator was fucking me. And you know what? I'm just harsh. I have a cousin. I'm pretty blunt, but my cousin's real harsh. And I remember I was going through another one of these awful, treacherous fucking breakups. And I was in Hawaii visiting her, and she looked at me and she goes, I've dated a lot of people. I know a lot about this. Why does this keep happening to you? It's not happening to me or any of my other friends.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Oh, truth bomb.
Yeah.
Truth bomb. Yeah. That's
so that story, like, what story do you have? And you might need to go back and cancel some stories like all women are crazy, or all women just want me for my money, or all guys are cheaters, whatever it is. You're going to keep attracting that to confirm it.
Yes, exactly. And it doesn't matter how valid or legitimate your story feels or seems, or how true it seems. It doesn't matter. It doesn't serve you. So, and the only reason you feel it's so true is because you've actively sought out evidence.
That's right.
Over and over and over again to support the story. And you've done it mostly unconsciously, but even, occasionally consciously. So yes, there's no question then, at the very least, that we can all do right away is to look at the stories that we tell ourselves and other people, particularly around love and dating and relationships, and do what we can to tell ourselves and others truthful, but better feeling stories about all of it. It has to be truthful, but it has to be better feeling. So it has to be constructive. So just because it's true and you focus on it, that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. Just because it's true and it's valid or legitimate doesn't mean you should continue to tell it and retell it to yourself.
Hurting you possibly more often.
Absolutely. It's getting in the way, no question about it. And people can feel it, even if you're just telling it to yourself. You think, well, I haven't said anything out loud, but people can pick up on that. They can feel what you're feeling. And if you're telling yourself a story that doesn't feel good, I promise they feel that on some level, consciously or not, and it's not attractive, right? It's not attractive in terms of friends. It's not attractive in terms of professional opportunities. It's not attractive in terms of romantic interactions or experiences.
What are, now I know you have a lot of really interesting research in your happiness book, and you've even mentioned a few stats so far in this episode. Was there anything new you came across in terms of research with the second book on love that you'd like to share or that stands out to you?
Oh, so much. One of the things that I found pretty interesting is so when I was in undergrad, I studied a phenomenon called positive illusion. It's also called the illusion of control sometimes. And what's fascinating within the context of happy and the happiest relationships is that in happy relationships, each partner does something very interesting that doesn't happen in unhappy relationships, which is they look at and focus on and tell themselves the story of and tell everybody else the story of the aspects within the other person that they love and appreciate the most, okay? You can think of it as sort of talking or speaking to and about the best possible version of the other person, but they see it factually, they see it as truth, right? And they do that consistently. It doesn't mean they don't see the other flaws or foibles or failures within the other person. It just doesn't take up much real estate in their head or their heart or their lives. And so, we can call it positive illusion because what research has also found is that people in happy relationships tend to have a much bigger, better, more blissful and loving view and perspective of their partner than even their partner's best friends do, right? So even your partner's best friend says, well, they're not that great. Are they great? That great, Elle? And you're like, actually, it's like, so again, it doesn't mean that they bury their head in the sand, particularly around things that are abusive or mean or unkind or cruel or any of those things. But it does mean that they have made a commitment, not only to the other person, but probably mostly to themselves, that they're going to focus on the best or most positive aspects within the other person and themselves because it feels good to them. It feels good to do so, right? So that way, you're not doing it just for the other person. And so when the other person doesn't show up in a way that you like that day, then suddenly you change your mind and start talking about all the worst parts about them. They do it for themselves because it feels good to them. So that's one key finding is this sort of research around positive illusion and sort of best possible selves and the ways in which people see their partners more positively than even their partner's best friends.
Yeah, that is the other thing too. It's interesting, the honeymoon phase, as we call it, might pass, and then people just sort of turn to the down, like they start to look at the things that are possibly wrong with the person.
That's right. And that's why, Elle, and you're so great about, man, just pulling out these really poignant insights that are backed by research. That's one thing too. Most of us, even though again, we'll all say, I know that marriage won't make me happy. I know that over half of marriages end in divorce. I think 55%, and second marriages, so 64% of those ended in divorce. I know that, but still, this person makes me so happy. Okay, fair enough. The research tends to find that, of course, when you first get married, there's a small bump or blip in a positive direction in terms of your baseline happiness level. But that happiness level quickly returns to its baseline level and often dips much below that original baseline level after that honeymoon phase ends, right? So as soon as the honeymoon phase ends, you sort of find yourself back to the same happiness level you were at before.
Which is why you got to get your shit happy first.
That's right. And why you have to make a commitment to being unconditionally happy and or loving despite of it all. And that doesn't mean you have to stay in a relationship. That's the one thing I want to say over and over again. It's like, look, if you think that relationships, particularly romantic ones, are the source of love and peace and happiness for you, instead of one of many channels, you're screwed. You're screwed because you're going to have this experience of love and peace and happiness that waxes and wanes. One day you'll feel good, the next day you won't. For a
And
season,
it might be based on how they're acting or what they're outside of you. Again, the no.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we know that doesn't work. Marriage, relationships don't solve your feelings or experience of lack with respect to peace, love, or happiness. And if you can't sort of address it at the source and make a commitment to yourself to be at peace, to be happy, and to be loving because it feels so good, and without an expectation of reciprocity or reward, if you can do that, then you'd be surprised at how every relationship fulfills you because you're fulfilled already. It enhances the fulfillment that you already have. Right? So it doesn't make you happy. It just enhances the happiness that you already have.
Let's talk about, I know there's so many people out there that feel like there's no one for me, or maybe not for me, or whatever. Right. And so what I noticed is I love watching like the HGTV renovation shows, and
Yeah.
I'm always like in the beginning, I want to see and then I fast forward to the end because I just want to see I don't really watch them breaking down the walls or anything, but what has brought me a lot of joy from watching those shows is seeing all the different variations of couples and love. And sometimes you'll be like, that's an odd visual, right? I feel like it's very inspiring because there are some couples where you're like, okay, I wouldn't have picked those two, but look at them, or right. And it really, like, I kept watching these shows going, wow, there is someone for everyone. And there's a lot of love out there. I think, again, part of people's stories is like, there's no good guys in my town. Look, at Los Angeles, everyone says that all the time, right? Oh, there's just no good guys here. Like, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And so now you've relegated yourself to a situation where unless you move, you're screwed, right? You have got to change your perspective. And I know we can get down on that when you've been dating, you keep meeting people, you talk to people, and still nothing's sparking. We've got to keep hope alive. So I guess let's give people out there some hope. And if there's any statistics or anything to help that, great. But let's talk about that a little bit, because I know it's a worry for a lot of people. And look, I mean, I'm sure you and I have even had I've had moments like that.
Absolutely. And part of what gets in the way there is having an agenda for anybody and or everyone in your life. Mm-hmm. It's understandable. Lots of reasons for that, including socio and cultural ones. But the truth is that we only ever have this moment. Pure and simple. Okay, we only ever have this moment. If you can remember that consistently, remember that your job and your pleasure and privilege is to enjoy this moment and whomever is in your life or in front of you in this moment fully and deeply without any expectation or any experience of quid pro quo, or I'm going to give you something to get something because I want something in the future. If we can stop that and just truly, genuinely dial in to the conversation or the experience you're having with the other person and stay focused on the best in the other person, what you share in common, sure, honor and appreciate those differences. If you can just make a habit of that and do it because it feels good and do it because you don't know if you have tomorrow, you don't know if you have another moment, and do it because you can't get the past back anyway. If you can do that, you can do that consistently and mean it. Don't try to do it just so that you can get the benefit of that, which is like a long-term relationship or, a happy dating experience for the next 13 years. It's like, just do it in this moment. And then when you meet the cashier, do it in that moment. And then when you're with the cat or you're with the baby or you're there alone with the book, just do it again and again and again. If you can just use every single moment and interaction and activity and person to be the love that you essentially and ultimately are. And you can do it for selfish reasons, for joy's sake alone. You'd be shocked and surprised at the way that life seems to suddenly cooperate and collaborate and conspire with you and for you and on your behalf without any additional effort, right? That's just crucial. But most of us get so far out ahead of ourselves. And we say that we're being loving and we say that we're, coming from this place of not judging and not having expectations and not having an agenda for another person, but we're doing everything but that. We can't help but think about tomorrow. Is this person going to call me tomorrow? Do they like me now? It's like, that's all too much. Just enjoy yourself and have more fun with whomever you're with and with whatever you're doing, and do it for your own sake because it feels so good. And I promise if you can do that consistently enough and really mean it, you'll be surprised at the way in which life and relationships and other people show up for you, because suddenly you're showing up for them in a way they've never been shown up for before. It's like, if you really want to impress someone you've never impressed before, let go of the desire to impress them at all. Have as much fun as you possibly can with them. Drop all your expectations, your agenda for them. Let go of this idea or this experience of this interaction being a business affair or some kind of negotiation or something that you're going to get meaning and purpose out of later, and get the meaning and purpose out of it here and now, no matter who they are or what they're doing or saying or not doing or saying. And I promise you, everything else is added in time. Everything else shows up for you in time, but you really have to mean it. You can't just kind of half step that. We kind of want to half step it and just do it to get something in the future. If you're really intentional and authentic about it, you'll be surprised in the ways in which life and other people will show up for you in your life.
I was speaking with Allison Armstrong. She's been studying men and women for years. And one of the things she said is, she goes, what I found is, at least male-female relationships, excuse me, let me just clear my throat here. She said that it's really important that women look for men who they already, like she was saying, talking to the guys, and she said, guys, find yourself a woman who already admires and likes you where you're at. And women, you must find a guy who likes your body type. And I thought, well, those are really different things there. One's based on hair. But again, these are like things she's studied for years and have said. Anyway, so the first piece about admiring where the person's at, this is something I'm going to just belt it out and see what you have to say. So yes, you and I and everyone, we're always fulfilling our potential, right? We're never just maxed out and we've done it all. Okay. But there is something, in my opinion, when you're really young, let's say you're dating in your 20s, potential is different then. The whole world is you just started your potential, right? You know what I mean? You just got into the world as an adult and now you actually have a chance to fulfill it. Then you get a little bit older and it's a little bit different. Like, for example, I would not date someone who I felt had a lot of potential, but had not satisfied any of it. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. I really feel like the most important thing for me, and maybe everybody, is you really should admire the way the other person thinks about things and looks at the world. So let's take a real extreme of that. And let's say you're like let's say you're totally like, it's bad. It could be like, let's say you're racist, you're homophobic, okay, that's fine. Great. Then you should date someone who also thinks that way, because you would admire and like the way they think. It works for everybody, right? It works in any spectrum of beliefs or whatever. I think that's so important. I have come to see that over so many relationships, because that you can't change either, really. Yes. I mean, yes, if someone has a positive demeanor and that's great, but they could be happy. And then maybe they aren't a good provider, a good partner, or maybe again, you're satisfying all your potential and they're not. It's tough. I like to look at people and go, again, give them a break. We're all still satisfying potential. Do you know what I'm saying? Can we talk about that? Because that's, again, another savior thing. It's not happiness, but it's the potential thing. I'll be your life coach. I'll help you get the job. And then you're now got a rescue project.
Yeah, for sure. So I would definitely agree that it feels a lot better to get or set an intention to get into a relationship with someone who does not make your life harder intentionally, even unintentionally, right? I mean, life is already hard enough. So to that end, I'd say that for sure, if you can find someone who you admire, certainly respect, are inspired by, and or stimulated by, in ways that are sort of easy and effortless and enjoyable for you. By all means, I mean, enjoy that interaction, enjoy that experience, and enjoy that relationship. And I would also say that it's easy also to forget how much control we have over our own experience of being inspired, finding respect and admiration. I think, it's sort of my job. Like I would say, and I'm sure that you'd probably agree, there's not a person on the planet I've ever met who I haven't learned something from. And if I look closely enough and with the right lens and the right filter and the right eye, I find something within that person that inspires me, that amazes me, that I admire. It's like incredible. It's like you could meet someone with no ambition at all who is able to enjoy a perfectly lazy Sunday afternoon or Wednesday evening, doing absolutely nothing, having no possessions. And for me, it's like, wow, it's incredible. Like you can just totally let all this fear and all this desire go and enjoy the day without anything else in your mind, without feeling any obligation to do much of anything. I love that, truly. And I can at the same time find someone who's just absolutely crushing it, a multi-billionaire who's working nonstop and crushing in their own respect. And I think that is just phenomenal. I love something about that. I'm inspired by that. So that all being said, we all have value preferences and lifestyle preferences and philosophies and belief systems. And yes, it is absolutely great to connect with someone who you find alignment with in that way. Now, of course, if you can find alignment with yourself in that way, it's much easier to find alignment with other people, even people who don't share your belief system or values or lifestyle. That being said, it's just so great and so uplifting and validating to meet someone whom you connect with in that way, right? Where you align with belief systems and philosophies and values. Now, all of that being said, I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that because you found alignment today with this person, you'll find alignment tomorrow or a year from now or 2 years from now. I mean, that very same person whom you loved so much because they believed in abortion or didn't, or believed in diversity, equity, inclusion or didn't, or believed or were conservative or were liberal, suddenly makes you miserable, right? 3 days later, 3 years later, 30 years later. And so it's like, wait, what am I doing?
It's not really foolproof. Yeah.
That's right. So love is not seeking alignment and agreement with the other. It's seeking alignment and agreement inside yourself, and then finding as a consequence of that, alignment and agreement with most everyone, whether they find alignment and agreement with you or not. And again, also, it's like, I'm not going to purposely put obstacles in my way. So I'm not going to choose the person, who, for me at least, who's unkind or mean or cruel or judgmental and say, let me have a relationship with them. Of course not. But I think it's easier for most of us to point the finger and say, the reason I'm not feeling love is because this person is unlovable. That's just not the case. Everyone in that case, we could all call ourselves lovable if the condition for being lovable is the other person being lovable instead of our consciousness being loving, if that makes sense, right? So I think it's up to us. But as far as relationships go and dating goes, for sure, by all means, make it easy for yourself. Don't take the path of most resistance. Take the path of least resistance.
Yeah, and I found it's not like then it's part of beliefs and values. It's also how they're like character in the world. I remember years and years ago, I was on a date with a guy, and we parked somewhere, and he put he had like a blue handicap, the thing, and he put it on his thing, and I said, oh, are you disabled? And he was like, oh, this is from like a surgery like a year ago, but I just kept it up so that I could keep the thing.
Yeah,
that bothered me.
Yeah.
And there were little things like that kept happening that, again, you're like, if I looked at things on paper, I'd ignore it. If I looked at other, you know what I mean? But I'm looking at like, ooh, I don't know if I like the way they're looking at the world there. I don't, right? Like, and some people might be into that. So it's like, obviously not just like values of like, political or whatever, but it's these kind of things, or like, are they really nasty to the waitress because she brought the wrong order? Or, right, we start to see certain character traits. I think it's so important to, again, when those things are bothering you, you got to stop and go, okay, hold on a minute, note to self, right? Let's take a look here.
Absolutely. And so you're right. So the invitation there for me is, how can I continue to love this person, whether or not I want to stay in a relationship with them? For me, for a long time, I thought that forgiveness and or love meant staying in a relationship with people, even friendships with people, who whose value systems or belief systems or attitude or approach toward other people I did not agree with. I thought it meant just staying in it. It does not mean that. It means, what can I need
Can I
to do?
ask you why in that moment was it staying in it? Because a lot of times people are fearful of ending something or getting away from something like that because like, oh, well, we've already been friends this long, or I'm worried about what they may think or what they may say. Meanwhile, you're still suffering because every time you hang out with them, you're like, I'm not enjoying this.
Totally. I mean, yeah, exactly. For me, a lot of it was just, you're right, there's history here. Oh my gosh, we put all these years in. So, and then I was sort of just, I sort of was broken of that notion when I was introduced to, sunk cost. Took an economics 101 class and they introduced the concept of sunk cost. You're like, oh, that's right. If you're an hour and a half in a movie, you've already paid and you can't get your money back. Save the hour and a half, go do something else more enjoyable. Don't think you have to sit through the next hour and a half of the movie, the entire 3-hour movie, and suffer. That's sunk cost. You can't get sunk cost back. Cut bait and run. Perfectly fine. At least you get to enjoy the last hour and a half that you would have otherwise spent in a terrible movie. Same thing with relationships, right? So for me, a lot of it was based in, history, in this sunk cost idea. I didn't have an understanding of that. The other piece of it was I just didn't want to hurt the other person's feelings. I genuinely don't like to hurt people's feelings.
Yes, that is a big part of it. Yeah.
It is. And
you feel bad. You're like, I don't want them. They're going to feel bad. This is yucky. No one wants to be broken up with, friend or not. Yeah, it's yucky.
Totally. And consistently, I underestimated that other person's strength and their resilience. And in some cases, even their cruelty. Like I underestimated. I thought, I'm going to make sure I take care of their feelings. Meanwhile, they were plotting and planning to get rid of me a long time ago or whatever, right? Or cheat on me. So that's one thing I learned. And then the other thing I learned is, Rob, you think that you're being so loving by simply postponing or delaying or procrastinating on ripping this Band-Aid off, but you're making it worse because you're just both getting more and more invested. You're going to have to eventually, rip the Band-Aid off anyway. Secondly, you're actually and actively leading them away from the true source of peace, love, and happiness that exists within themselves.
That's right. You're holding them back. You're not the answer for them. And so now it's become a cruel thing to stay.
That's right. For both of you. Yes. And you're teaching them a terrible lesson in life, which is like, your happiness and your experience of love depends on me, and my love and happiness depends on you. There's no greater myth or misconception that I've ever suffered from, except for that one.
How can we, if we want, and I know you'd say, hey, get happy, look at your thoughts, right? Be present. I know you're a celebrity dating coach. You're often on shows. People are asking your perspective on dating. You've heard so many scenarios. What are some things right off the bat for either men, female, both, whatever, just people in general to look out for? What are some tenets? You're like, this is what I notice a lot. If, give us some thoughts about how we can think about this.
Number one, prioritize, if we're talking about looking for other people, I'd say in terms of red and green flags, look, number one, for someone who is happy, if not happier than you, yep, or intends to be happy, if not happier than you. That's critical because in relationships, the least happy person will pull down the happiest person. It doesn't work the other way around. So you might think, I'm really solid and stable in my happiness. I'll pull this other person up. No,
nope, you get brought right back down.
Yes. So that's number one. I feel like a synonym for happiness is love, and a synonym for love is presence. So I look for someone who can be very present. That doesn't mean they don't find themselves distracted and don't multitask at times. But if when they're with me, are they really in the conversation? Are they able to be present? For me, it's just synonymous with happiness and love. Another part of that for me is I want someone who understands and can appreciate that we can disagree without being disagreeable. That love isn't two heads agreeing, but it's two hearts in alignment. So I prioritize my love for you above and beyond any opinions, thoughts, or beliefs I have about what you should or shouldn't do with your life or what the world should or shouldn't do for itself. So it's like I can have a perspective on this and feel very passionately about it without needing you to also agree with it in order for me to continue to feel good about it. And I can let you feel and believe what you want to feel and believe about your own life and the world without feeling that it has to compromise how much love I share with you. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to stay in a relationship with you forever, but it does mean that I continue to feel love. So for me, again, it's about love and experience. So I'd say that yes, one, it's looking for someone who is happy or happier than you, or at least it tends to be, aspires to be. I would say that's just critical. I would say someone who's present, part of being present, or one of the ways in which you can sort of test for that is like self-regulation or emotional regulation. So someone who's able to self-soothe, who, might find themselves off balance or off center emotionally, but they know how to sort of work themselves back up the emotional scale, and they don't project. So that the other piece is projection. I look for folks who aren't quick to project on the other or point fingers right away, right? It's huge. It's like, most relationships are full of projection. So the second,
and also let's talk. I just want to interject on that projection. Half the things people are projecting, or they're blaming the other partner for lacking in, they haven't even spoken up to say that they want.
Yes.
So you're blaming, right? It's like they don't do that. Have you asked them? Well, no, but they should just. So this fucking mind reading thing, which every conversation we know this is, but people still do it. It's like you are literally in a world of assumptions. It's almost like passive aggressive people who are sensing a threat that's not there and acting on it. It's the same kind of philosophy.
Yes, you're right. It's interesting about that. To your point, we all live from our respective perception boxes, we can call it that, or a better word sometimes that I use is just we don't appreciate the reality of separate psychological experiences, right? We don't appreciate the fact that we all live from separate psychological realities, our own worlds, so to speak. And so what happens in most experiences is that because we're so intimately familiar with our own ideas, we first of all expect the other person to share those ideas. And we think that we have the only way of seeing things or the best way of seeing things without realizing that we spend our whole life just doubling down on a confirmation bias that is extraordinarily biased to that point, right? It's not objective at all. We're not objective at all. Second of all, we can do what we can to try and sort of step outside of these separate psychological realities. But at the end of the day, we're still always locked in to a way of seeing the world that is uniquely sort of our own. And hopefully through conversations with other people, we can sort of broaden that. But what happens ultimately is that because we have only our experience to sort of share in the world and come from, when we feel something or think something, particularly if we're not very self-aware, haven't spent much time looking into all of this, it's easy for us to immediately assume that one, the other person should see things the way we see things, and they should therefore think and speak and behave the way we do or the way we expect them to. And secondly, when we feel a certain way, we immediately assume that it must be their fault that we feel the way we do. So yes, I mean, most relationships are full of projection. Even something as small and simple as like me asking you for a glass of water. It's like, hey, Elle, do you want a glass of water? Doesn't mean I don't care about you, doesn't mean I don't love you. But in so many cases, almost in all cases, it really comes from a very selfish place where it's like, either I want Elle to like me and feel like I'm a good host and I'm taking care of her, I'm a good friend, or I'm thirsty. That was the first thought. Second thought is, I'm going to be on the way to the refrigerator anyway. Let me see if Elle wants something. So even in those little instances, we project. So all projection isn't bad. It says that we want to recognize it, particularly in those moments when things are heated or uncomfortable, or we're blaming someone else for how we feel and therefore disempowering ourselves and giving away our ability to then change or positively influence the way we feel, and then by virtue of the way we feel, the way they feel too, right? So we give that a power away consistently when we point fingers, blame, or project.
Do you have a few more minutes? I know we're...
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
yes.
Great. I have a question about, or just any thoughts around this. So I remember many years ago, I'm sure you've been here too. I'm sure everyone listening has. I was literally like in lust, love, passion, whatever, the whole dopamine crack house of hormones. I was in it, and I was on it had been past the honeymoon phase, but I was still in that. And I was on a trip in Mexico. It's like beautiful hotel. We're like on the water, whatever. And we're hanging out on the deck. And I knew this was the biggest red flag. I had this thought where I was like, I wish my friends were here.
Yeah.
I wasn't having, the only fun I was having was in that lust, dopamine, whatever, that kind of stuff. And then when I was like, I don't really want to hang out though. Like the 5-hour plane ride's not that enjoyable. And it was this moment, the sinking feeling of like, that's not good, because what is a lifelong partnership or a long-term partnership, but really loving being and spending quality time with that person. And so I think there are a lot of people out there that just, and I think it's so important to hang out and see, like, if you're totally tired of someone by the end of a day together, and you're like, ugh, I mean, that could happen anyway. But I'm just saying, if that's really consistently the case, that's a red flag.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, it's interesting to me how certain people can drain you and certain people can energize you. And that's a great, really fantastic recognition and realization there, Elle. At the end of the day, you, at the very least, don't want to spend a whole lot of time with a person or people, professionally or personally, that drain you. That's not a good use of your time, energy, and effort. You can't maintain or sustain that. Sure, there are some people you can't get rid of, you wouldn't want to get rid of, but they drain you. So you want to make those interactions as short and sweet, but as infrequent as possible, really. And there are folks that energize you, and those are the people that you want to spend more and more time with, right? So you want to be careful and beware of the energy vampires, and spend more time with the other folks. And all that being said, you'll find that what often most drains and or energizes us is not just the other person, it's also the ways in which we think about the other person. Now, sure, I'm not a big fan of people who talk nonstop. I'll talk in these podcasts, but mostly I'm kind of quiet otherwise, unless I have to be on for something. And so I love my aloneness, and I love silence, and I love stillness, right? And so people who talk a lot, they tend to drain me. But I also realize that part of the challenge is that when they get to talking, my mind starts to get talking too on the inside. And so I have to find that stillness and silence inside me, even when there's none or seemingly none on the outside. And that can feel like a lot of work. It's also part of my pleasure and privilege to learn how to do that when it's easy, so that I'm in conversations with people who drain me, I can do a better job of sort of maintaining or protecting my energy in that way. But again, don't torture yourself on the way to love or happiness. Take the path of least resistance, but also recognize and realize that what you're ultimately looking for is always not only within you, but it is you. And it's a sort of quiet, cool, calm, composed, still or silent mind that will often give you a glimpse into that, particularly in the moments when you are just by yourself.
And I remember you telling me one time on an interview that you were in a relationship where, because you love to read, you like to go be sort of by yourself in silence and enjoy a book, and that, your codependent partner was taking that as an offense, right? I think that's so important that, again, goes back to enjoying your own company first, getting happy with yourself so that you can be with someone else and not go down those codependency routes. But also how important it is for you or for people like me to speak up and let people know that this is a part of how we need to be in relationships, that we're going to need alone time. It's not personal. I got to go off here and stare into the wall because that's enjoyable. I need to be with my thoughts. I'm a writer. So are you. We're coaching this as it's a part of our life, right? But we also have to voice that too, the needs. Not sure if there's anything to say about that. I just remember that story, again, people being offended by something where it's I'm just enjoying myself over here.
Yes, Elle, that's so beautiful and critical. And I love the way you said that. I completely agree. It's hard, I think, for lots of folks that are people pleasers, even empaths, to one, speak their mind or speak their heart, to set boundaries, to maintain boundaries, and to also make sure those boundaries are, in fact, boundaries and not just walls. Right. And so,
yes, good point.
Right. So, so the real opportunity there is to, of course, speak your truth, but it's not really truth unless you can say it in a loving way. Right. And to say it in a way that can keep the other person's mind and heart open to receive it. Now, you can't completely control that, but you can err on the side of saying it in a loving way that does keep their mind and heart open. And so that's just critical. So, I think I would often struggle with that because I couldn't find the right words. As I've worked at it, I've got better at finding the right words. But the real point there is just to make sure that you're starting with and sort of finding alignment or love within yourself first, or happiness within yourself first, or peace within yourself first, and then letting the words find you and sharing from that place in the most positive, loving way you can, that you are at your best, your creative best, your relational best, your human and spiritual best when you have time to recharge. And you often find your moments of aloneness especially recharging and refreshing and inspiring and energizing. And that's why you love and appreciate their patience and flexibility around that so much. And you do it not just for you, but you also do it because you're so much better company when you're happy. And they too are so much better company when they're happy. And so I, again, would say it's not really love if it isn't happy. And, if you're not happy, you can't be loving, and you certainly can't experience love. So it's just critical to, like you said, speak your truth, but do so in a way that's loving so that your point of view can be not only expressed and communicated clearly, but openly and enthusiastically shared and then applied. So you don't have to revisit this 14 million times.
You don't want to keep drawing that down. At some point, you're I've drawn this boundary 15 times.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah,
also I just, this has nothing to do with love, but it is funny. I think people feel like you and I are total extroverts, right? But I
yes,
know that you're like me, you're a total, probably like an ambivert, right? You really enjoy, like you can do both, right? You know, if you're in the mood, like you go out, maybe you go to a bar and just talk to people, absolutely, or be on interviews and shows or panels. But then, man, do I like a lot of time alone and enjoying my own company, which is a very introverted thing. So I really consider myself kind of both, but it's funny because I think a lot of people think people like us are just always extroverted.
that's so true. It's so true. You're right. We are introverts, and I was most shy in my high school class. Most shy, and
Which I think is shocking for most people that
it,
ever run into, of course. Yes.
it's kind of shocking for me even to this day because I'm thinking, wow, I was really awkward and shy, and gosh, so much social anxiety. I mean, so much social anxiety that it made me depressed and suicidal for so long. And I kind of got sick and tired of being so shy, and so I put together at some point in time like this progressive socialization plan for myself. I mean, I was like in training with myself. The first week, I just said, I'm going to start saying hi to 10 people, a week. And then I upped it the next week. And I kept going and moving forward until I got to places where I was like, okay, I'm going to have a full blown conversation in this and that. And what I discovered along the way that in addition to me making it a much bigger deal to interact with people than was necessary, I would freak myself out in my own head when the reality was that it was so much easier and simpler than that. You also build your confidence. But I also discovered, to your point, that this whole introversion, extroversion thing is great and helpful and useful. And it's also occasionally an obstacle to just being a human being. Like I'd say that none of us really probably always or fully fit into any particular box in any way. So you're right. Like there are days when I feel, man, I'm just as social as ever. I'm just saying hi to everyone. And and then there are other days where it's like, I could probably be alone in an ashram in the middle of nowhere with no technological devices for at least a year, at least.
Totally. Oh,
Right?
yes.
Yeah. So I think we, and hopefully we all have a little bit of that flexibility. Love is a pendulum, socializing is a pendulum. And, on one end, we'll call it introversion. We might call it aloneness. On the other is extroversion. We might call it, togetherness. And a fully functioning pendulum swings from each side. If it gets stuck to one side, it's no longer a functioning mechanism. It's no longer a working tool, and it's no longer real love, right? So real love is like a battery. You charge it, for those of us who are introverts, in our aloneness, and then you go and share that charged battery with the world in your togetherness, in your extroversion. But you need both, right? You need both the sort of meditation and love. You need both aloneness and togetherness. You need both introversion in moments and extroversion in moments. And we all fall in different places along that continuum, even on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. So it's important to sort of respect that and honor that, not only within yourself, but also for others.
Your new book, Love from the Inside Out, on Amazon, everywhere. Everybody get this book. Your first book was incredible, Happiness from the Inside Out. What is, if you have one offhand, what do you think is like one of the best love stories you've heard?
Oh boy.
Whether it was a client or a friend or, you.
Yeah. I'll say that I'm sort of course, biased. My parents are quite an inspiration, quite frankly. They are not married, and they got divorced when I was about 18 years old. And it was not a particularly happy and harmonious, first 18 years, I think, certainly for them. And they are better friends now, and they get along better now and connect better now and talk more glowingly about each other now than they ever have. And they're in their 60s, my dad's 70. I think that is one of the most inspiring, impressive love stories I've ever heard. They're not together in a romantic fashion. They're not married in the way that we traditionally think about love stories, but they share a love for each other and for their children in a way that is just astounding to me. They're both, and self-sacrificing isn't the right word, although that's what they are. Because I don't want anyone to sacrifice themselves. You sacrifice yourself, who's left, sort of left to love the world and each other. But they just haven't come from this place of true, authentic love. And you just feel that deeply and consistently, whether you're part of the family or not, and make everyone feel that way. So for me, my parents are my greatest inspiration. And it might not fit into anyone's fairy tale love story. It's something much bigger and better and more blissful than that.
I think it's actually even bigger and better because they obviously had enough contention to get divorced in the first place, which doesn't seem like it would leave some room for love. And instead, they're probably more in love with each other and love each other now more than they probably did when they were married.
Totally.
Yeah.
They share stories now about each other that just blow me away. My mom
that's
said,
so
your dad, and my dad was, oh, your mom is incredible woman. And I just think, gosh, and you can feel the authenticity, and you're just like, oh, I mean, it makes you almost.
We see, are they going to get back together?
yeah, I don't think so. I think they're both pretty settled in where they are in their lives, and it's working for them, and it works for everyone else too. But yeah, Elle, I'd say that's one of the greatest love stories.
Well, thank you so much for always being so generous with your time. Everybody grab the book. We'll put everything in the show notes to connect with Rob, but it's Rob Mack Official on Instagram, where I think you're most active. And also coachrobmack.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like I've been your website so many times. Thank you so much. And thanks for all of the work you're putting out there. These are happiness and love. They are hand in hand, one without the other, and we all need more of this. So thank you.
And Elle, thank you so much for having me as always. And talk about a paragon of love. Elle, you are one of the kindest, most generous people in the whole world that I've ever met. And I appreciate you so much for that. You are literally a living, loving light. And I'm just in awe every time we connect. So thank you so much for just being a role model for the rest of us in that way.
Oh, thank you. And right back at you. And to everyone else, we'll see you next time. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.